Thank you. Our first speaker in opposition of the motion is Madeleine Matthews. Madeleine is a second-year undergraduate student reading philosophy at Jesus College and the union's current equalities officer. Madeleine, you have the ears of the House.
Hi everyone, thank you all for being here. It's fabulous to see the chamber so very full. And tonight I'm going to be arguing in opposition to the motion. This is because, despite the media hype surrounding reform's rise, there's a fundamental confusion about what constitutes true opposition. Therefore, the real opposition is in fact the incumbent opposition, the Conservative Party. Reform cannot be considered the real opposition because they lack three essential qualities. First, the institutional apparatus necessary for thorough government scrutiny. Second, the historical staying power demonstrated by successful opposition forces. And third, the parliamentary presence required to present a credible alternative government. I'll examine each of these three critical deficiencies in turn. So first, let us turn to the institutional deficiencies of reform. And this is best shown through comparison with, again, the Conservative Party. So only one of Reform's 4 MPs has previously served as a Member of Parliament. In contrast, 79% of Conservative MPs elected in the 2024 general election had previously served as MPs. And further to this, none of Reform's 4 MPs have ever held ministerial positions, which is obviously not the case for the Tories. Looking at their front bench alone, we can see many former ministers. Think Kemi Badenoch, Priti Patel, and Alex Burghardt. And this experience gap extends to other areas. There aren't any Reform MPs on any select committee, for example. And this lack of experience makes it difficult for Reform to have the practical knowledge to enable them to thoroughly scrutinise the government. Next, let's look at research and policy development. The Conservative Research Department, founded in 1929, helps develop policies for the Tories, and they also have extensive external policy networks, including relationships with specialised think tanks, such as the Adam Smith Institute and the Policy Exchange, and prominent academics, such as Niall Ferguson. Furthermore, the Conservatives have a well-built membership infrastructure, including the Conservative Women's Organisation, the Young Conservatives, and university societies, including our very own KUKA. They also operate many local constituency associations nationwide. These provide recruitment pipelines and campaign bases from within communities. And in contrast, Reform lacks permanent offices in most constituencies, instead relying on ad hoc campaign operations, and their membership structure is not so developed as the Tories. Now, let us move on to historical staying power. So Reform lacks the historical staying power which they would require in order to constitute a formidable opposition. And multiple insurgent parties throughout the history of British politics have faced this same issue. First, let us look at the SDP, the Social Democratic Party. Their trajectory offers a direct historical parallel. In 1981, 4 MPs left Labour to form a new party, the SDP. They were dubbed the Gang of Four and spoke about breaking the mould at various press conferences, leading to initial media excitement, which is echoed nowadays in the press's coverage of Reform. At their peak, the SDP, in alliance with the Liberals, had an opinion poll rating of 50%. However, by 1990, the party had failed, so had to fully merge with the Liberals to form the Lib Dems. The centuries-old mould of British politics was not to be broken this time. Another example is when Reform's very own Nigel Farage attempted to break this mould. His former party, UKIP, triumphed in the 2014 European Parliament election, winning the most votes and seats of any party. This led to headlines about political earthquakes, again an example of this initial media furore. Yet across their existence, only one MP ever won a seat for UKIP in a general election, and their support collapsed post-Brexit, demonstrating the vulnerability of single-issue momentum. Reform, with their narrow policy focus on immigration and sovereignty, also lacks the wide-ranging appeal required for longevity. No thanks. Similar to these previous parties, Reform benefits from disproportionate media coverage. As we've seen, this momentum has historically proved an unreliable indicator. This is especially true of social media, where many young people seem intrigued by Reform. However, many of those young people are not yet eligible to vote, and even those who are eligible are unlikely, given historical data on young adult turnout. Despite this, Reform continues to heavily depend on Farage's personal brand rather than a sustainable party structure. He has a show on GB News, as well as 1.2 million TikTok followers, which is more than any other figure in British politics, or so raved the FT yesterday. However, this is doomed to fail. The Trades Union Congress chief has called Farage a political fraud cosplaying as a working-class champion. His previous projects, such as UKIP and the Brexit Party, demonstrate this pattern of initial success followed by a decline. Moreover, a personal brand alone is insufficient to sustain electoral success. Unlike Donald Trump over in the US, whom you may have heard of, who successfully leveraged his celebrity status within an established party infrastructure, Farage faces this additional challenge of building reform from scratch while operating in a parliamentary system which, as we've seen, historically resists new parties. Trump's success came partly from working within the Republican Party's existing framework, something which Farage has never even attempted to do with established British parties. Now let us move on to my third point, parliamentary presence. So reform also lacks the parliamentary presence which they would need to constitute a real opposition. So first, this might use rather a literal point, but His Majesty's most loyal opposition is defined by the Commons as the party with the second largest number of seats. And this formal position isn't just a kind of nominal. It also comes with certain rights under parliamentary procedure. For example, the opposition has the right to set business on 17 days in each parliamentary session, and they have precedence in asking questions to ministers and speaking at debates. Therefore, on this literal level, reform simply is not the real opposition. No thanks. Moreover, it's unlikely they will achieve the requisite parliamentary presence to be considered the real opposition within the near future. The first past the post system, as I'm sure you'll all know, structurally favours established parties with concentrated support. Reform's voter base is too geographically diffuse to translate votes into seats. Even with a 14.8% share of the popular vote in 2024, their parliamentary presence was minimal at only 0.8%. Reform thus effectively splits the right-wing vote rather than replacing the Conservative opposition. We can thank them for how badly the Tories won the last general election, at least in part. And the Conservatives remain better financially resourced with more established donor networks. They're nowadays considered the party of London-based entrepreneurs, and their donor pool reflects this. Their main competitors for this are Labour, ever since Labour have become much more business-friendly under Starmer. This doesn't leave much room for Reform, who rely on only a handful of individuals to support them. So, I've done this quite quickly, but in conclusion, Reform represents a protest movement rather than a genuine opposition force. The Conservative Party, despite its electoral setback in 2024, remains the most credible opposition. They have institutional knowledge, which facilitates their scrutiny of government, Labour at the moment, the historical resilience to actually last, and the parliamentary presence to actually pose an opposition to the government in the kind of substantive sense that it's often meant. Therefore, Reform's fundamental identity as anti-establishment, as outsiders, contradicts the role required of the opposition. While they may serve as a catalyst for change in the Conservative Party due to the superficial popularity of their policies, this merely makes Reform an opposition to the actual opposition. As the first speaker for the proposition mentioned, there are a lot of policies that the Tories are using nowadays have moved further towards Reform. This is not because Reform are suddenly this kind of party that's going to stand the test of time and present an actual opposition to the government. It's just because they're showing, it's just because they're showing what the people want, and so people are moving towards that in order to garner more votes. The weight of historical evidence and current reality, therefore, clearly demonstrates that Reform is not and cannot be the real opposition in British politics. And with that, I strongly urge you to vote in opposition to the motion tonight. Reform is not the real opposition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madeleine. We're going to move to a round of floor speeches from the audience. Would anyone like to give a short 2 to 3 minute speech, or shorter, in favour of the motion, this House believes Reform are the real opposition? Yes, over there. Name and college, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Jake, I'm from Emmanuel College, and I don't have that much to say just because I think the first proposition speech was very good, but I think the simple point to be said here is the Reform Party has a narrative. They have a story that they're telling the British public. Now, in my opinion, and I'm sure in the opinion of most of the people in this room, it's a pretty detestable narrative of kind of reheated Trumpism. But it's a narrative nonetheless, and it's a narrative that speaks to a lot of people. What narrative are the Conservative Party selling to the British public? Kemi Badenoch doesn't really have any policies other than sort of vague murmurings about transgender bathrooms. And so if you are a right-wing voter in the UK today and you have a local election coming up or whatever, you have no reason to vote for the Conservatives other than maybe like a vague tribal loyalty to them or just as a tactical vote. There's no essence to them that would make you want to vote for them. And so in that respect, Reform are already the opposition, simply because they are in command of the right-wing narrative of British politics. The Tories are completely inert. And there's only one more thing I want to say, which is that the first speaker for the opposition said that it's because of the first past the post system and the structure of British politics, it's really hard for third parties to get in power. Sure, like the SDP failed or whatever, but anyone here who's ever studied British political history in like the 19th century will know that in that period, the British two-party system was between the Conservatives and the Liberals. But in the early 20th century, the Labour Party overtook the Liberals as the main left-wing party because they had a stronger narrative that better appealed to the issues of the day and the issues that people cared about. And so the Liberals fell by the wayside and became a sort of slightly irrelevant third party, as I would say they continue to be, I'm afraid. And so, with all that in mind, it's not even a hypothetical thing about the future. Reform are already the main opposition, I would say. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.